Made the mistake of sleeping in braids, and now I look like a poodle. We're going with it. I have apparently reached that age where when I meet new people, one of the first things they ask about me is what I do for a living. Does this mean I'm old? Honestly, it's concerning. And what's more concerning is when I tell people that I work with wildlife or I work in wildlife rehabilitation, they have a lot of preconceptions and a lot of assumptions that they immediately make about me and my work. And most of the time, it's not right at all. So this makes me think people have these really warped ideas of what working with wildlife is actually like. And not only is that a bit damaging because it can really enforce misconceptions that the public have about wildlife, but also it means that people looking to get into this career or looking at their career options might not actually have a real idea of what this means. So this video is all about answering 5 common assumptions about wildlife work and giving a bit more of a view of what this work actually entails and what your life might be like if you decide to go into wildlife work or, specifically like me, rehabilitation. Assumption number 1, and this is probably the thing that I get the most, is that I must spend a lot of time touching or playing with wild animals. This is literally what I advocate against, okay? Now, this idea probably does come from the fact that when you work with domestic animals, you do spend a fair amount of time hands-on with them, particularly, you know, with dogs and cats and stuff. It's part of the job. It's generally actually part of the job to get them comfortable around humans and to train them. So I can kind of see why this might have come about. And often when you see things on the TV or online about people working with animals, they do sort of really push this fun, glamorized sort of idea of it, where you are spending a lot of time touching animals and doing all this hands-on work. But that's not actually the reality 99% of the time. When you work with wildlife, you are going to be doing a lot of food preparation, you know, chopping, cleaning fruit, all that kind of jazz, enclosure maintenance and design, enrichment and behavior observation. I think I spend more time looking at a monkey than I do anything else. And cleaning. So much cleaning is involved in animal care all day, every day. Cleaning enclosures, cleaning medical equipment, cleaning sick bays, cleaning always. And you're gonna spend a lot of time with poop. Honestly, at this point, I feel like poop is my best friend. You learn a lot from an animal's poop. It's fascinating and very helpful. The only time you're going to be really hands-on with an animal is if it's going through a rehabilitation process, which is a lot of the kind of work that I do. So yes, there are going to be times, particularly when you're working maybe with orphans and getting them healthy and ready to go and meet their own kind, there might be some hands-on interaction. This also might be the case if you're working with ex-pets who tend to be particularly humanized and very difficult to socialize with their own kind. It could also be the case if you are working with any animals with special needs, and it can be the case if you're doing medical intervention. But if you're doing a medical intervention, you're not exactly going to be playing with the animal. Most of the time they're probably going to be unconscious, or you're going to be touching them through fences and things for your own protection. If you work somewhere a little bit more commercial that perhaps trains animals or works with ambassador animals, then yes, you might have some more hands-on interaction with those specific animals. But this comes with a whole host of other ethical dilemmas and questions that you really need to be addressing in order to make sure what you're doing really has the best interest of the animal at heart. Because more often than not, when you work with wildlife, the goal is to have the animals as wild as possible and to have as few animals in captivity as possible. So no, you don't spend a lot of time cuddling and touching animals. And if you're going into wildlife work expecting that, then you're gonna be disappointed. The second assumption people make all the time is that you studied either zoology or veterinary medicine. There are hundreds of different kinds of degrees that can lead you into conservation if you want to do the hands-on sort of behavioral side of things or the research side of things. For example, I actually have a degree in psychology and I focus mostly on animal behavior. That's maybe a little bit more of an unconventional route in, as I didn't know what I wanted to do in school. If you want to hear more about that, I have a video about how I started work as a wildlife rehabilitator. There are literally specialized degrees these days in conservation ecology. You can do them all over the world. Really worth looking into if that's something you want to do. Most general science degrees will give you a really good basis for animal work, so biology or something more specialized like marine biology, and of course anything to do with sort of environmental science will give you a really good basis as well. And a lot of the time, if you have these sorts of degrees and you want to go into research or a very specific path or career, then you might need a master's as well that specializes you further. But that's not the case for everything, and if that's not something that's possible for you, that doesn't mean that you can never work in wildlife career because you haven't necessarily got a zoology or vet med or specific conservation degree. I do know people who are working in the sort of hands-on part of wildlife work who don't have any degrees. They've gone through a purely practical route, doing volunteering, work experience, internships, apprenticeships. There's actually a growing body of apprenticeships, certainly here in the UK, to do wildlife work. So if you're more of a practical learner, if university or college doesn't feel like the option for you, then you can definitely look into those things. You can also look into diplomas. There are diplomas in animal care and welfare all over the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same level of commitment as a full degree. And if you're not working directly hands-on in the sort of behavioral side of things or the research side of things, you might have a degree in something more related to the behind-the-scenes work or the human aspect of the work. For example, maybe you work with wildlife through helping with wildlife filmmaking or social media or online education, then maybe your degree is more to do with film and media. Or you might work in the sort of accounting or business economic side of things, doing fundraising or management, or maybe you work with the people involved. So maybe your degree has more to do with sociology or a human resources aspect of things. There are so many different careers within conservation and wildlife work and so many different routes into it. There is no one route that works for everyone. And while vet med and zoology will give you an amazing basis for most animal work, they're not the only options. And if you feel like they're not for you, don't feel like that means you cannot work with wildlife. The third assumption I get all the time is that I work in a zoo. I completely get why people who maybe aren't particularly involved in the world of wildlife work and conservation might assume this. Zoos are where the majority of people are exposed to wildlife and how the majority of people hear about wildlife and know of people who are working with wildlife. It's sort of like the mainstream intro to wildlife. And I would say similarly these days for safaris. They probably come under, I mean, a safari is a kind of zoo really, particularly the ones in the UK. Obviously ones further afield that are in areas where the animals actually roam free, it's a little bit different. But there are so many different places where wildlife work takes place in so many different capacities, and zoos are only one small fraction of this. For example, I tend to do all of my work on wildlife rescues and sanctuaries, but you'll also have labs and research sites that are doing more of the focused research-based projects. You'll also have in situ observational work where you are literally out in the field working with wild populations or semi-wild populations perhaps. Offices, so much of wildlife work happens from within an office, and that kind of work tends to be wildly underappreciated, which is something that makes me so mad. So maybe you are doing your wildlife work from an office, and that is also amazing and very cool and very valid wildlife working experience. Vet practices. There are vet practices out there that specialize in exotics, and there are also vet practices that just happen to have wild animals coming in, particularly if they are situated near a wildlife rescue or sanctuary. Even places such as community centers. I know of community centers that do a lot of wildlife outreach education, a lot of animal vaccinations, and that help with wildlife calls, pickups, all that kind of stuff. And people who work on the road, who don't necessarily have a set destination, but they may travel from place to place, answering different calls, doing different sorts of activities and outreach and education. So if you want to work with wildlife, don't feel confined to having to work in a zoo. If you want to, that's a completely different story. But if zoos aren't your thing, no pressure. There's lots of different places out there that you can look into working. The fourth assumption is that everyone who works with wildlife are sort of hippies, tree huggers, vegans, and maybe I don't help this stereotype all that much. I'm a long-time vegan. Probably members of my family might think I'm hippie-ish. I don't really know if that even has a set definition anymore, and I have most definitely been known to hug a tree. But conservation and wildlife work benefits from having a variety of people with a variety of different backgrounds and viewpoints that all come together and form discussion and different ways that we can move forwards to create solutions to problems. So actually, when I first went into wildlife conservation and working on sanctuaries, I found veganism pretty rare. I was definitely the minority. I remember being at a sanctuary and being the only vegan, and it's definitely becoming much more common these days, but I still wouldn't say that the majority of people who work with wildlife are vegan. I think there are a lot of different viewpoints in regards to the relationship between veganism and conservation, which is definitely something I would like to talk about more in the future, but it's not something that everyone instantly agrees on. You don't start working with wildlife and suddenly you're vegan. And also this stereotype of, I suppose, hippies in a way. I still don't really know what is meant by that, but from what people have said to me, they get surprised if I dress up nice or something. I mean, I don't tend to dress up nice much anyway. This is the nicest I've looked in a very long time. But you do get all sorts of people who love to wear their dresses and do their makeup and have long nails and look glamorous and gorgeous, and I have no idea how they do it. And then they're shoveling poop half their day, you know? From poop to glamour. And really, how you present yourself, your outward image, it has nothing to do with your ability to do your job. And then I guess the other aspect of the hippie stereotype is the sort of mindset of spirituality and holistic healings and all that kind of stuff. And yes, that does exist within wildlife work. The same exists within every practice, the same exists within medicine. But a lot of wildlife work is very scientific. Again, as medicine is, there are both sides of the coin, and there are times where both sides can actually come together to create a really good healing program for an animal. And I've worked in sites where you have people who very much swear by holistic healing and people who very much swear by nothing but, you know, very scientifically proven and used medicines, and these people tend to find a middle ground somehow. And then beyond that, things like spirituality, your beliefs, your religions, nothing to do with your ability to do the job, to be quite honest. The one thing about this assumption that probably is true for all wildlife workers is you need to care about the environment a little bit. Honestly, if you're working with wildlife and you don't care about the environment at all, then you're missing this huge part of how we're going to be able to move forwards and make the world safer, both for wildlife and for humans. It honestly doesn't make any sense to be protecting wildlife without having any thought of consideration for the ecosystems that keep them alive. So the fifth and final assumption I want to address is that wildlife work is always exciting, and people seem to have this idea that I have this like super cool life where I'm always like jetting off places and being called out to dramatic events and all that kind of malarkey. This is half true, okay? So one of the best things about working with wildlife is no case is ever the same, because you're working with individual animals that have different personalities, different backgrounds, different histories, different levels of perhaps trauma, and you can never rely on using the same methodology for every animal. Sometimes things just aren't going to go right. You always need to be on your toes. You can never predict their behavior because they are wild animals. So really, you don't really ever know what's going to happen. And to be honest, wildlife has a way of lulling you into a false sense of security where you think everything is going amazingly well, and then just like bam, they're not happy. It's not okay. You need to change everything or they're gonna throw a fit. So yeah, it can be pretty exciting, pretty cool. But there's the flip side of that. There's the side where instead of exciting, things are terrifying. You're sometimes in dangerous situations. You're sometimes in situations where you have to see things that are really difficult to witness and that really hurt. And working with wildlife comes with exposure to a lot of different kinds of trauma. It comes to exposure to loss, and it comes to exposure to danger. And then the other side of it is that it's not always exciting or difficult. Sometimes it's very repetitive. You have the excitement, but then you have what I call the between days. These are the days where maybe all you do is food prep and chop 1,000 butternut squash, or clean out all of the enclosures, or do all of that paperwork that piled up during the exciting times. Or days while you sit beside the same animal, watching them, waiting for something to change, doing the same thing for weeks or months just to see if it gets you anywhere. For for them to then make one tiny behavioral adjustment as a result, and for that to feel like the most amazing thing in the world. And this isn't just the case for hands-on work. The same goes for research, lab work, management. A lot of exciting things happen, but between those exciting things, there's the paperwork, there's the funding to apply for, there's the waiting for results to happen. Wildlife work of any capacity requires a lot of patience. I thought I was a really patient person before I started working with wildlife, but when you get working there, you realize there is a whole other level of patience required in order to not lose your mind in this field. So if patience is something that you struggle with, you're definitely gonna want to look at that before you really commit to working with wildlife, because it's not gonna be drama 24/7. Those are the main assumptions. I don't know why I'm getting sassy. Those are the main assumptions that I get when I tell people that I work with wildlife. And hopefully debunking them a little bit and offering some alternate views and alternate paths into wildlife work shows you just how varied it can be, how much you cannot assume anything about a person just when they say they work with wildlife, and maybe has given you a better view of whether or not working with wildlife is going to be right for you. If you work with wildlife and you have had anyone make any grossly inaccurate assumptions about what it is you do, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about them. Or if you don't work with wildlife and you have some assumptions about what it's like that you want someone who does work with wildlife to answer for you, pop them down as well. Let's see what people think about this kind of work. And if you like content all about working with wildlife, animal welfare and behavior, and a bit of veganism and plant-based living thrown in there, then feel free to subscribe to my channel so that you will see videos in the future, and let me know anything you particularly like me to cover. Hopefully it is not long now before I am back on fully hands-on work, and when that happens I cannot wait to share more exciting behind the scenes things with you and let you know a bit more about the realities of working with wildlife. Until then, I will see you in the next video.